I never set out to become our neighborhood's unofficial detective. It all started with a simple flower bed. After retiring last spring, I decided to plant a colorful wildflower garden along my driveway. Within 48 hours, a violation notice appeared on my door. Unapproved landscaping modification, it read. I was given 7 days to remove it or face a $75 fine. My hands trembled as I held that notice. 40 years paying my mortgage on time, never a complaint from neighbors, and now this piece of paper made me feel like a criminal in my own home. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the $1.75 I could afford that, but because something deep down felt fundamentally wrong. That same evening, I took my usual walk through our community and noticed something that made my blood run cold. Richard Parker, who sits on the HOA board, had installed an entire vegetable garden in his front yard 3 weeks earlier. No violation notice in sight. In fact, Thomas Wilson, our HOA president, had publicly complimented it at the last community barbecue. Thomas Wilson. Just thinking about him made my jaw clench. Always impeccably dressed in pressed khakis and polo shirts, with that practiced smile that never reached his eyes. He'd been president for 7 years, and in that time, our once friendly community had become a place of whispered conversations and nervous glances. I removed my flowers anyway, digging them up one by one as neighbors walked past. The shame burned my cheeks as I worked. Mrs. Abernathy from next door stopped to ask what I was doing. When I explained, she looked over her shoulder before whispering, "They got me last month for my bird feeder." Said it was an unauthorized feeding station. The next month, I received another violation this time for leaving my garbage invisible from the street for excessive time. I had rolled it back within 8 hours after collection, but apparently that wasn't fast enough. That night, I drove slowly through a neighborhood. The Miller family across the street had left their cans out for 3 days straight. No violation. The Johnsons had a boat in their driveway despite clear rules against it. Nothing. And Thomas Wilson himself had installed landscape lighting that stayed on all night, violating our dark sky ordinance. It wasn't just inconsistency. It was targeted punishment. I remember sitting at my kitchen table that night, a sick feeling in my stomach. The retirement I'd worked toward my entire life now felt tainted. Would I spend my golden years afraid to plant a flower without permission? I thought of Barbara Watson, who had spoken against the board's special assessment last year. Now she seemed to receive violations almost weekly. That's when something inside me snapped. I pulled out an old leather notebook Tom had given me before he passed. For your bird watching, he'd said. Now, it would document a different kind of predatory behavior. My first step was systematic observation. Each day during my walks, I carried my phone and photographed violations throughout the neighborhood. I created detailed notes with dates, addresses, and descriptions. I felt like a spy in my own community, and the thought both disturbed and energized me. After 2 weeks, I had documented 37 technical violations across our 124 homes. Everything from improper trash placement to unapproved fixtures, fence heights exceeding regulations, and non-compliant mailboxes. What happened next shocked me to my core. Only 9 of these violations had received official notices, and 7 of those 9 homes belonged to people who had openly challenged the board. Meanwhile, Thomas Wilson's next-door neighbor had constructed an entire shed without approval, yet received nothing but friendly waves when Thomas passed by on his morning jog. This wasn't random. This was strategic intimidation. I attended the next HOA meeting with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When the open forum portion began, I stood up and formally requested access to all violation records for the past year. The room went completely silent. Thomas looked at me with narrowed eyes before turning to Patricia, the board's secretary. "We'll need to check if those records are available," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "They're required to be available by state law," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I'll wait for your call about when I can review them." The walk home that night was the longest of my life. Had I just painted a target on my back? Would I now find violation notices weekly? I barely slept that night, imagining every worst-case scenario. 3 weeks passed with no word about the records. Then came a knock at my door at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday. Thomas Wilson himself stood on my porch, holding a manila envelope. His smile never wavered as he handed it to me. "Your requested records," he said, "though I can't imagine what you need them for. We're on a tight ship here." "I'm sure you do," I replied, accepting the envelope. Our eyes locked for a moment too long before he turned and walked away. Inside the envelope were the records, and they were even worse than I'd imagined. Over the past year, 82% of all violations went to just 14 households, each of which had disagreed with the board on various issues. Some violations were absurdly minor. One homeowner received a notice for having wind chimes that were excessively audible. Another for a temporary graduation banner that exceeded permitted celebration time by 2 days. The most telling case made my stomach turn. The Johnsons spoke against the pool renovation at the February meeting. They received a violation notice the very next morning for excessive weeds, despite 6 inches of snow still covering their yard. I sat stunned, records spread across my dining room table. This wasn't just selective enforcement. This was systematic harassment. That afternoon, my doorbell rang again. I opened it to find Eleanor Jenkins, a 78-year-old widow from down the street. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Is everything okay, Eleanor?" I asked, inviting her in. She held out a violation notice with shaking hands. "They're saying my roses are too tall and block sight lines. My husband planted those roses 40 years ago." Her voice broke. "I spoke up last week about the unnecessary tree removal they want to do." Something inside me hardened into resolve. This had to stop. I needed to be strategic. These weren't just annoying neighbors, they were calculating and organized. I created a color-coded map of our community. Red for homes that receive violations, blue for homes with actual rule violations but no notices. Then I documented which homeowners had spoken at meetings and when their violations occurred. The pattern was undeniable and damning. I quietly shared my findings with a few trusted neighbors. Lisa Mathers, an attorney who lived on Oakwood Drive, reviewed my documentation, and her expression darkened. "This isn't just petty politics," she said. "This could constitute harassment and discrimination. If they're targeting people based on protected speech, there are serious legal implications." Together, we formed a small committee and developed a standardized enforcement policy proposal requiring regular community-wide inspections, checklist evaluations, and transparent reporting. The night of our presentation, I could barely eat dinner. Would anyone even show up? Would I be standing alone? When I arrived at the community center, my heart leapt. The room wasn't just full, it was overflowing. People were standing along the back wall, some I hadn't seen at meetings in years. Thomas Wilson's usual smile faltered when he saw the crowd. He rushed through the standard agenda items, his voice clipped. When he finally called on me, I walked to the front with my folder of evidence clutched tightly. Our current enforcement system has some inconsistencies. I began diplomatically. I outlined our proposal for standardized enforcement, keeping my voice even. Thomas dismissed it immediately. "This seems like unnecessary bureaucracy. Our current system works fine." I took a deep breath. This was the moment. Does it work fine for everyone, or just those who agree with the board? I asked. Then I revealed my maps and data. The room fell completely silent. "I've documented over 120 violations across our community over the past 6 weeks," I explained. "Yet only certain homes receive notices. And there's a remarkable correlation between those who speak up at meetings and those who receive violations." I projected a timeline showing exactly when residents had spoken at meetings and when they received violations, often within 24 to 48 hours of their comments. Thomas's face flushed crimson. This is coincidental," he stammered. That's when Eleanor Jenkins rose slowly to her feet, leaning on her cane. "Is it coincidence that I received a violation for my roses the day after I questioned the tree removal budget?" Her voice quavered but grew stronger with each word. "The same roses that have been there for 40 years. The same roses your predecessor helped my husband plant, Thomas." One by one, neighbors stood to share similar stories. The room's temperature seemed to rise with each testimony. Thomas attempted to regain control. These are isolated incidents. 27 isolated incidents in the past 6 months, I interrupted, pointing to my chart. All following residents who spoke against board proposals. Lisa Mather stood up then. As an attorney, she began, I should point out that retaliatory enforcement based on protected speech could potentially open the HO and individual board members to personal liability. That's when I saw fear flash across Thomas's face. Real fear. For 20 excruciating seconds, no one spoke. Thomas cleared his throat and mumbled something about reviewing the concerns. Someone in the back of the room laughed out loud. Barbara Watson, who'd received more violations than anyone, called out, I move that we vote on the standardized enforcement proposal tonight. The room erupted in seconding motions. Thomas looked around desperately, but he was cornered. The vote was 103-4 in favor. But we weren't done. Lisa proposed an immediate audit of all outstanding violations and a moratorium on new ones until the system was implemented. Passed overwhelmingly. Then came a motion to hold special elections for new board members within 60 days. Also passed. As the meeting adjourned, Thomas grabbed his briefcase and hurried toward the side door. I caught his eye briefly, that practiced smile completely gone. He looked smaller, somehow diminished. The changes came faster than I could have imagined. Within a month, violation notices decreased by 64%, distributed evenly across the community. The special election brought in 3 new board members, including Eleanor Jenkins as secretary. Thomas opted not to run again. 6 months later, our community had transformed. The fear was gone. People chatted in their front yards again. At the summer block party, a first in 5 years, overheard newcomers commenting on how friendly everyone was. This morning, I took my usual walk through the neighborhood. The changes weren't just in policies or paperwork, they were visible everywhere I looked. 6 houses now have wildflower gardens similar to what I had originally planted. Eleanor's roses bloom proudly, untouched. The Miller children built a little free library that would have been immediately cited under the old regime. But the most meaningful change came when I passed Thomas Wilson's old house. It's occupied by a young family. Now Thomas moved to a condo downtown shortly after the election. Their yard has a handmade fairy garden that technically violates at least 2 of the old standards. Beside it stands a small sign, Community Gardener of the Month, awarded by our new Neighborhood Beautification Committee. I smiled, taking it all in. The most powerful rules aren't the ones written in HOA covenants, but the unwritten ones about fairness, consistency, and respect. When we face intimidation with documentation and community action, we don't just change policies, restore the meaning of home. My wildflowers are blooming again, and this time they're here to stay.